I'm John Kraft.
Kirk Allen.
We're the Edgar County Watchdogs, and we're going to talk about the Jasper County Unit School District Number 1. First of all, earlier this year, one of the board members carbon copied somebody else on an email that included, some documents from the school. Some of the board members got upset, sent him a cease and desist letter, and then censured him.
They did what?
Yeah, censured him.
The board censured one of their own members.
Yeah, they don't have the power to do that.
We went through that at College of DuPage, didn't we?
Yeah, it didn't turn out too good for him.
No.
And then, so in the censure, it's basically an unlimited punishment period. First of all, they don't have the power to punish another board member. So keep that in mind. Second, the punishment that they doled out is unlimited. So from then to infinity, he can't have access to the same Dropbox account that all the other elected board members have access to.
Well, they can't do that.
And they won't email any board packets to him. He has to physically pick it up in person. And they won't allow him access to other school records at all, period. The same access that other board members have access to as a matter of routine, because they have to have access to it because it's part of their elected duties.
And I'm assuming that he gets the records much later than they do in paper form.
Yes, and some records he doesn't even get. They won't give it to him.
Also, they're actually denying certain records.
Correct.
Well, they can't do that. That won't work out well.
And it's apparent from the video you're going to watch that happened after the last board meeting.
That was a pretty exciting meeting.
Yeah,
Actually, the meeting wasn't exciting.
well, after the meeting, it's obvious two of those board members just have a simple personal vendetta against Mr. Ernest. So this came across the notification today that a lawsuit was filed on this very subject in the federal court, United States District Court, Southern District of Illinois, filed by Mr. Ernest, school board member. And it named the Board of Education, Superintendent Johnson, John Fulton, Gordon Millsap, Holly Farley, Mandy Ryman, Melissa Stanley, and Rob Street, all board members, as defendants, because they are defendants. And it all stems from their unlawful punishment of him, in our opinion, and his restricted or unreasonable access to records of the public body.
Where do these people, who's advising them that they can do this stuff?
Obviously some attorney that just wants billable hours like usual, because hey, we can do what we want unless somebody sues us. That's their...
Well, that's more billable hours.
Yeah.
So give them bad advice, let them do something stupid, and the attorney's going to end up making more money.
So he's suing because they deprived him of his liberty interest in his elected position and his claim of declaratory relief. He claims that they denied access to confidential board information, didn't provide any hearing process, violated his due process rights, violated the rights of the voter, which we wrote about before.
Yep.
The voter has a right to have the person they voted in office to have the same access to the same information under the same conditions as any other elected board member.
Well, you tried to explain that at the board meeting, or after the board meeting.
But they didn't want to hear that.
They didn't want to hear that.
They called the police. We'll get to that in a minute. Count two, he's asking for a declaratory judgment because he's stripped of his rights through governmental action, stripped of his liberty, interest in his position as an elected official. Now, you can read this article too, and I'll put a link to it. This happens all the time in Illinois. It happened to Warren Lefevre. It happened to
Marshall, Illinois, then College of DuPage.
It happened with the alderman in Bloomington, Illinois. It happened to College of DuPage. It happens everywhere. And surprise, there's a court case, Ebert versus Thompson or something like that. And here's what the judge said about access to records.
Wait a minute. You're telling me there's already a court case on this point?
Yeah.
And who won?
The person that was denied access. The elected official won.
Where'd you find that?
I guess it was Google search. Here's what the judge said. It was not up to one or the other of them to be the keepers of the conscience of all the other people or impose extra statutory requirements upon this exchange of information among public officials. The extra statutory requirements here are not giving him the same information under the same conditions.
Yep. You know, it's pretty sad that there's already a court case on point, yet they went ahead and did this. I mean, the lawyers should be held accountable for this one.
He's just practicing out in their work.
That's right, they're practicing law.
Judge also said elected officials are entitled to reasonable access to the books and records necessary to perform their function, and that access cannot be doled out by the teaspoonful. And he kind of defines reasonable. He defines unreasonable as being a phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning demanded immediate access. He said that's unreasonable. So my guess is reasonable access is anytime that office is open for business is reasonable access for an elected official. Not for the people like us that are not elected officials, because we have to go through FOIA. He said the right of an elected official to examine books and records is unequivocally yes. The public has an interest in seeing their elected officials perform the functions they were elected to do, and any limits to record access will be decided by the voters. If he or she abuses her office as trustee, that matter will be brought to the attention of the voters. So what the judge was saying is, and in this case I was quoting, it was about a trustee of a township wanting the list of people that were given checks for assistance checks or something like that, and they were concerned that this person would go out and release all the names of everybody that received the money. And the judge says, so be it.
Correct.
If that trustee releases those names and the public did not want those names released, they'll vote them out at the next election. Until then, you have no authority to restrict access to that information.
That is correct.
So that's what the lawsuit. You have anything to add on the lawsuit?
No, not on the lawsuit. Other than one board member after that meeting, she did say, she welcomed the lawsuit. Go ahead, sue.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
You got what you asked for.
Jasper County School District. Your board member asked for it, and it got filed today.
Okay, back to that meeting. We'll post this video, and later on we'll post a video of the whole meeting, because you need to hear the public comment during that meeting and the discussions when this board member was asking about certain payments that were made, and he was questioning like, why did you bring this up earlier? And obviously his answer was, because I never received the information in time. So December the 18th, we went to a board meeting. They went to executive session. After the meeting, they had a little bit of public business. Then they motioned to adjourn. That was seconded and voted. Meeting was over. And I approached them slowly. And I told them, hey, I know your meeting is over, but I'd like to ask another question while you're packing up and getting ready to leave. And I just started my questioning, and one of the board members started talking over me and accusing the other board member of inviting his friends in there. He didn't know we were coming to talk about this.
Well, they insisted that we were paid. They actually said that we were hired to be there.
Yeah, it'd be nice. My wallet's not any fatter. She talked over me. I raised the volume level of my voice to overcome her talking over me.
As did she.
And then she raised her voice. I raised mine. She raised hers. Her friend next to her, a fellow board member, chimed in at the same volume level, which caused me to...
That one next to her, wasn't she the one that called the police?
Yeah, and then, you know, what do you do when you're losing an argument? Call checkmate and go call the police when nothing happened, and then lie to them over the phone. Go ahead. What's the report say?
Well, the dispatch was 2 men from Edgar County watchdogs yelling and screaming at board members. Now that was the dispatch report, and that is a blatant lie. And the video proves that, because where was I during this escapade?
Sitting down behind the camera. And if I was yelling and screaming, then those same board members were yelling and screaming back.
Right. But I was sitting there watching this, and it was just an argument between, you know, John and those folks who refused to even remotely answer the question. All they wanted to do was attack the other board member. But there weren't 2 people from Edgar County watchdogs yelling and screaming. That was the first red flag. But while I'm sitting there watching this argument, this person who called the police, who said she feared there was violence or a threat of violence, she's engaged in this conversation. She walks around the table, out the door, and she's probably 20 feet to my left in the other room, and she's on the phone with the police, and I hear the term threatening violence, or there's violence, something to the effect of violence. And I said, violence? And I looked at her, and I looked back at the board, and you'll see this in the video. Why would she say there was, you know, violence threatened? Nobody threatened any violence here. I was perplexed.
That way you get the police there faster.
Well, and that's an interesting point. So now the police are getting a phone call that, you know, supposedly there's 2 people there that are violent or threatening violence.
Oh,
so
let me interject. I believe she's the one that works for the clerk's office at the county, who also...
Would that be the one that...
I don't know if she works at the county clerk or the circuit clerk. However, one of those clerks at the county called the police on somebody because they wouldn't pay her 50 cents for pictures they took of with their own cell phone, and had the guy arrested. But that's a different subject. Go ahead.
That didn't work out real well for him either. Maybe this is just a pattern of practice down there. But anyway, you know, when the police get a phone call to respond to a situation of possible violence, that elevates their response, it elevates their adrenaline, and it puts them in a position to where they're going to be on guard, and they're going to probably be a little more aggressive than they would under, you know, a normal circumstance as to what really happened that night. So when the officer comes in, you know, he walked by us, there's no problem. In fact, we waited for him.
Yeah.
And
I didn't want anybody to think we're trying to scoot out of town real fast.
So we waited, and well, we had the video running the whole time.
Who knows what they would have told the police.
Yeah, how many times has that video been a lifesaver for us?
A lot.
These board members just absolutely lie through their teeth when they do this stuff. But anyway, he came back in, and when you watch the video, it was interesting. He wanted to know where I was from. Well, here's his report. I was on patrol. Dispatcher Cravens advised me that some subjects from Edgar County watchdogs were causing a disturbance at the Jasper County board meeting. So where was I from?
Edgar County.
And he was told that, but he asked me, where are you from? And I said, I don't believe that's relevant. And immediately he elevated this situation, and by gosh, it's relevant now. You're not going anywhere. Give me some ID. Well, first off, you know, I don't have a problem telling who I am. But usually we want to defuse situations, not elevate them. And I think this is a situation that got elevated improperly to begin with. But I gave him my ID. You gave him your ID. He didn't like the ID you gave him.
I gave him what he asked for.
Well, no, that's not what he asked for.
It's fixed now, so.
Yep. And you'll see this in the video. But after he was done, he walks outside, ran whatever he ran. He came back in, gives us our IDs back, and that was the end of it. He says, all right, thanks, guys. You know, appreciate your cooperation. Have a good night. That was the end of it. But reading the report, some of the things on here, and You want to cover the follow-up that you sent them?
Yes, I followed up because, you know, it says we were disrupting a school board meeting. Well, wrong answer. They motioned, seconded, and voted. The meeting was adjourned. There was no meeting.
Correct. So there was no interruption of a school board meeting.
There was no legal meeting because if they insist it was a meeting, then it was an illegal meeting because the other meeting already adjourned.
Correct.
Then the charge says
they were in Holly's face, yelling at her, and one of the subjects had been pointing his finger in her face. Well, the video shows I wasn't even engaged in the conversation. I'm sitting down. So the board member that made the call and accused both of us of yelling and screaming is a liar.
And you can't get in somebody's face from 5 to 6 feet away. I was at least 5 feet
with the table between them.
I was at least 5 feet away with the table between us. And the only reason I had to raise the tone of my voice was because the board member and two were raising the tone of their voice, and I started the conversation. I wanted to finish the conversation because I had something to ask them. They didn't want to hear it, so they raised their voice. I raised mine, and I use my hands all the time, but I wasn't in their face pointing like it says I was, and that did not happen.
And you know, if they'd have listened to what you had to say, because they didn't listen during public comment, if they would have listened and actually discussed at another meeting or called a meeting to discuss what was really being presented, they'd have realized we were actually there to try to tell them, you're going to get sued if you don't fix this.
And my question was, how long are you going to punish him?
Right.
And this lawsuit shows, and we didn't know this was going to get filed today, but it shows one of the main complaints is it's a never-ending punishment. There's no end date.
Right.
It's like a judge saying, you're going to jail. For how long? I'm not going to tell you.
Right.
You're just going to jail. So, the other things, if I was screaming and yelling, then they were doing the same thing because they were as loud as I was. The complaint says it was a municipal code violation of disturbing a lawful assembly. Well,
nope.
That was not a lawful assembly. The meeting was over. If they were assembling again,
it's an illegal meeting.
that would have been an unlawful assembly.
We pointed that out when they closed the door.
And they closed the door and discussed business of that public body behind closed doors without going into closed session. So that was an unlawful assembly. And I say we didn't disrupt it at all, lawful or unlawful. How can you disrupt something by going up to ask them a question? I acknowledge the meeting was over, so I just want to ask you this question while you're packing up to leave. They could have sat there and said nothing and packed their stuff up and walked out. But no, they escalated, which caused every party to escalate, including the police department. No board member ever said, hey, get out of here, shut up, keep quiet, back up, you're too close, quit pointing. I don't like what you said, nothing. No board member or even the superintendent said any of that. They couldn't have felt apprehensive or fearful because one of the board members came around the table.
Well, first off, they were both engaged in the conversation.
Right up beside me to unplug her extension cord for her laptop. That's not fearful. And they were engaging in the conversation and elevating the volume on their own, which caused me to elevate, which caused them to elevate. So you cannot sit there and get in an argument with somebody and then go call the police and complain that, oh, they're yelling at
sure they can, because they're the school board.
Yeah.
And the part that gets me, though, is the report, or what she called and what she said and what's in these documents is a blatant lie.
Yeah. We're waiting on the actual 911 call, and we'll publish that.
Yeah, the 911 call will be telling, but in the video, you know, I made it real clear on the issue of violence. But when you make that kind of a call, you've already put law enforcement in a position of a heightened situation that's going to not de-escalate anything, it's actually going to escalate it. And that's why false 911 calls are a crime. Now,
and I don't blame the police department for doing what they did.
No,
they went in there, they knew those people, and they knew that the board wasn't going to get violent, and they didn't know us, and they didn't know what we would do. They were just doing what the one board member said we were doing over the phone, which wasn't what we were doing.
Correct. Yeah, I don't fault the police in this at all. They did their job. I think it could have been de-escalated a little differently, but it was escalated based on the call that he got and the way that lady was screaming and yelling.
So, that was it.
Sounds good. We all have a Merry Christmas.
Yep, enjoy that lawsuit. Thanks.